and obviously email campaigns and stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Fantastic. Well, it is 12 o'clock. For those of you who are just joining, hello and welcome. I will cover accessibility again in a minute, but I just want to say thank you everyone who's giving up their lunchtime to be here. Here in the UK, at least, it is 12 o'clock and we will be running through to 1 p.m. For those of you joining abroad, welcome. Do let us know in the chat where you're joining from today, whether you interpret that as what company I'm joining from or location. Either is very welcome, and it's always of interest to us to see who is joining from furthest afield. Today we are going to be talking about something that shifts how accessibility is approached once you see it clearly. So we will kind of cover some of what it is, but also try and give you some tips to apply this back in the workplace. We'll cover the difference between accessibility that passes, kind of the guidelines, things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the COGA guidelines, which is Cognitive Accessibility Guidelines for those who might not be familiar. We're going to go beyond just ticking a box and looking at the difference of kind of the simple box ticking through audits and actually removing the barriers. Ultimately, then, this session is about highlighting the gap in two things. That's what changes when lived experience sits at the center of the work, and and how we can make the workplace more inclusive. I can see a couple of people commenting in the chat, which is fantastic. So we've got Breeder, forgive me if I've pronounced your name wrong, joining on behalf of Signing Banks. Hello and welcome. We've done plenty of work with banks before, the likes of Virgin Money and ING, and so hopefully you'll be seeing some things that are relevant to you today. I can see Suzanne Lewis joining from Guide Dogs for the Blind here in the UK from Hertfordshire. It looks like most people are UK at the moment. We've got Sam from a UK joining session from Halifax in West Wiltshire. I assume that's the location, not not the bank, given where you said you're from. But yeah, more and more to come. So fantastic to see the chat working. If you do want to drop your LinkedIn in the chat, please feel free to do so. There is no obligation to do that, but I do believe in the power of networks, and I think if we can all connect with each other, share our accessibility challenges, and also share our accessibility journey, that can only be a good thing. Moving on then, just to talk about accessibility for the session. As the company with its name Accessible Me, you'd hope we are practicing as we preach. So live captions are available. We don't have them burned in, but here in the Teams platform, if you go up towards the top right-hand side where you see more with 3 dots, if you click on that, go down to language and speech. From there, you should be able to show live captions. Please do enable those to follow along, and I'll try and speak at a pace which will make them as accurate as possible. Cameras on is always welcome, but totally optional. If you do come off mute towards the end of the session when invited to do so, I would encourage you to turn your camera on just to help people lip read if they need it. You're welcome to use the chat any time, so please do pop your questions in the chat. I will try and move at a reflective pace, so not if you're trying to make notes, you don't have to do so furiously. We'll try and go a nice relaxed pace during the session, and there will be pauses throughout, so you hopefully won't need to rush to keep up. The slides will be shared, and in a moment you'll see. Actually, what I can do is pop that link into the chat. So if you do want to follow along with the PDF. There's a bit.ly link there where the deck is hosted in Google. Forgive me if you work at a company that blocks that use, but I can send you the PDF following the session. As always, we'll have space for questions both kind of midway and at the end of the session. So to start us off, I'd love to understand who's in the room today. In the chat then, before I get into the content, I'd love to know who's here. Please do pop into the chat your name. That's if it differs from your screen name. Where you're joining from, your role, and your organisation, if indeed you work at an organisation. These open sessions are open to everyone, so if you're a job seeker, feel free to let us know who you are in the chat as well, what kind of role you're into, and who knows, you may even find work from this, which would be a bonus. No guarantees though, just as a disclaimer. I'll give you a moment to do that now, and there's no pressure. what I would like to highlight is there is no pressure to share more than you're comfortable with. So if you just want to share your name and location, as many of you have done, that's absolutely fine. And whilst you do that, I'll take a moment to introduce me and who I am. So my name is Mike Osborne. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the founder and CEO of Accessible Me. Thank you for joining our February session. And I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the range of experiences in the room. Some of you may be very new to accessibility. Some of you may feel almost at expert level and a bit able to take the session on my behalf. So wherever you are on that scale, all are welcome. And we do have a range of experiences in the room. I want this session to be curious, practical, and non-judgmental. So if you do have a question, there's a good chance someone else on the session will have the question as well. One of the things I like to say is the only question that's a silly question is one that's not asked. Now, I did mention popping LinkedIn in the chat earlier. If anyone does want to connect with me, I've dropped my LinkedIn in the chat and you should be able to follow along. With that in mind, then, let's begin by making sure that today's space works for everyone. And that kind of aligns with our ethos at Accessible Me. We simply exist to remove the barriers that stop people from either learning. My 14 years this year experience is very much in the learning development sector. We work with a lot of organizations to review their e-learning, whether that's built in Articulate Rise, Evolve, other platforms. It might even be PDFs and PowerPoints, whether that's barriers to working, so helping organizations understand reasonable adjustments, and simply living fully. So imagine booking a table from a restaurant, arriving at the restaurant excited for your meal, being shown to your table, and to access my table, there is a step and no ramp, and I'm a wheelchair user. These kind of things, are adjustments that could have been put on the booking form, and unless we're asking the right questions, we may miss these opportunities. So today, we're not here just to tick boxes, we're here to build a better culture. Thank you for all those who are contributing to the chat as well. Good to see you, Suzanne and Paul, and thank you very much for engaging. Before we go too far in the session, I want to kick off with a quick question, and that's where are you today? So when it comes to lived experience in accessibility, where do you think you're at, either personally or in your organization? You can pop a number 1 if you think your organization relies mainly on standards and compliance. A number 2 if you occasionally consult disabled users or users with disabilities. A 3 if you actually actively involve people with lived experience in the design at any stage, whether that's outset or towards the end. And 4 if you're not sure. This is hopefully a safe space, so if you don't want to pop a number in the chat, that's absolutely fine. You can make a note on a pen and paper, and if that's the low, that's the reason to get in touch, and we can hopefully help you. So good range of numbers in the chat. I'm seeing a couple of 3s where we're regularly involving people with lived experience, which is fantastic. Some occasionally consulting with people with disabilities. Hopefully, we'd like to see more of that. And for those of you who join the company from 1, relying mainly on standards and compliance, hopefully we can move the needle through joining sessions like this, maybe collaborating in the future. But however that looks, we'll share a couple of resources which can hopefully move this forward. Do keep the numbers coming, and I'll give you a couple more minutes to respond. As I said, there's no judgment here. This just tells me, or us as a company, where that starting line is. And for a room with people who've registered from a variety of services, NHS, government, enterprise, charities, and even accessibility specialists, this is kind of exactly the mix I expected here in the chat. So let's make sure we're aligned next with what we actually mean. And I'm going to do that by defining, or at least giving our definition, just to level the playing field today and make sure we're working off the same hymn sheet, to use a bit of an analogy. So compliance. Compliance essentially means meeting the technical standards. Those technical standards might be things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, whether you join from the UK and need to adhere to the UK Equality Act of 2010, the European Accessibility Act, which came into effect June last year, ADA Title II, the Americans with Disability Act, it doesn't matter kind of what country you're joining from, most organizations or most legislations, should I say, in some way point to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2. 3.0 is in the works, but is not expected for a little while yet, and certainly won't be enforceable in law probably until around 2030. So there are changes on the horizon which are going to shake things up a little bit, but essentially most of the guidelines as they currently are, it essentially says, hey, we passed WCAG. And there are three levels of WCAG. There's level A, level AA, and level AAA. The law essentially says you need to meet the level AA, and if you need help getting there, we can do that. What does that mean for inclusion? Inclusion then means actually removing the real world barriers and asks the question, can somebody actually complete the task I'm asking them to complete without stress, without confusion, or without harm? I often say, as somebody who is neurodivergent with Tourette's, ADHD, autism, depression, and anxiety, I have a series of conditions. These don't normally become a disability until they meet a barrier. Those barriers may be systemic, time pressures in the workplace, a lack of reasonable adjustments. Normally, a condition becomes a disability when it meets a barrier, and those barriers are normally man-made. It's when we, as designers, have decided this is how we're going to design something. I'm going to have steps into this restaurant without a ramp. It might be these are the choice of the colors, the brand colors that we all foresees, or the choice of fonts and font sizes. All of these things can affect inclusion in one way or another. For public sector teams, compliance protects you legally, but for enterprise teams, compliance actually also reduces risk. When it comes to inclusion, then it's about dignity. So, have you ever used something that was technically accessible? It might have passed guidelines, but you still find it exhausting. Please pop a yes in chat if that's something you've seen. Give a couple of examples. It might be you've needed to book an appointment with your doctor or pharmacist, and that you might have completed a long NHS form. It might be technically signed with high contrast. It might be you may be able to tab through it correctly, all of those different things, but just the length of it will cause fatigue. It might be a council website with dense content, or it might be a corporate onboarding portal that kind of felt overwhelming. You've applied for the job, you've been successful, but it doesn't simply allow you to upload your CV. You manually have to complete all those different sections, or those things. Technically fine, but humanly difficult. That's where I kind of want to draw the line where you can be compliant, but you could still fail and use ableist language, gendered language, or other discriminatory language. It may be your imagery. If your imagery is all mostly or predominantly white people between the ages of say 18 and 30, and there's no one with silver hair, no one with visible wrinkles, limb differences, or skin conditions like vitiligo, you might still feel excluded from joining this company, or might not feel you have the same sense of belonging like anyone else. Moving on then, well, let's talk about why standards aren't enough. So standards, they simply test functionality. They don't test things like cognitive overload, emotional safety, cultural assumptions, or lived experience of navigating systems whilst vulnerable. Cultural assumptions may be, if I just kind of give you an example, I've done some delivery work for large organizations such as Fujitsu and a number of others. They were very clear to me that to say, Mike, when you're talking about neurodiversity, please be careful with the assumptions you make. If you talk about the benefits of remote working for neurodivergent individuals, please respect that in places like India, there is a mandated 2 to 3 days a week in the office. So, it's all good to talk about the benefits of working at home, but not everyone has that luxury. Certainly in some of the Asian countries, they may be further behind on the understanding of neurodivergence and neuro-inclusion, because of the popularity of things like Korean dramas, which portray individuals with autism or ADHD as maybe unable to have a conversation or unable to maintain eye contact. So then if you're someone with those conditions and you volunteer that information to the workplace, you may not be believed or may not be challenged. All of these things can be a big differentiator to how safe or how psychologically safe we feel at work. So standards then are essentially minimum safety rails. And that is a message that I want to reinforce too. Standards or WCAG guidelines, they are the bar. They are not the ceiling. These are the things we should be doing at minimum as a standard. And if that's overwhelming for you because there are so many of the guidelines, I understand that we've been there too, and so I can see a question in the chat, John. Does this list of shortcomings include cumulative effects? So solutions may seem fine when tested, but can cause difficulties over time. The list on screen might not include that, but absolutely can include things. So I do think intersectionality is a big aspect. So me as a otherwise able-bodied white man, yes, I have these neurological conditions, but if I have any of the other protected characteristics, such as sex or gender, orientation, race and religion, wealth background, the fact that I grew up with my parents together into the 20s, are going to be very different to somebody who hasn't had those same experiences. And in terms of my goal as a company, if you imagine a young up-and-coming Black woman who's already got the odds against her simply because she was born a female and born with darker skin with these societal issues, now imagine she sustains some kind of injury and she may have damage to her sight, her hearing, maybe a limb difference. Because she is young and up-and-coming, she's still going to need to get that workplace experience to gain the experience just like anyone else would. So we need to have systems where the ability to join the company to apply are inclusive. We need to make sure the onboarding is inclusive. We need to go beyond that to make sure we are doing better than just the D&I training being accessible, but actually is the managerial training, does that have that same level of design? My vision for a world is where it doesn't matter how many of these kind of intersection elements that you have, there should be no reason why you can't be the CEO of the very number one FTSE 500 company, whether that's global, European, however that looks like. But just to reinforce, these standards are minimum, they're necessary, but alone they're not sufficient. So, and this is where organisations can sometimes feel the tension. So you have the governance on the one hand, you've got the procurement frameworks, the things you need to go to onboard somebody or to onboard a new supplier. You've got these risk registers, but what you often don't have is embedded structures or lived experience in the team. And if that tension feels familiar in your organization, please feel free to drop a me in the chat, or just use the thumbs up emoji, and we can absolutely pick that up after. With that in mind, I'm just going to throw the question out. So, what happens when lived experience enters the room? And here we're going to get into the meat of the session. We did talk about going beyond the power, beyond the checkbox, and looking at the power of lived experience. So let's dig a little deeper into that. It's broke my slide design, which is slightly annoying. So my apologies for the on-screen challenges here. I can't fix that live in the session. I'll try and fix that for the PDF. Ultimately, when lived experience is present early, it reveals things that audits do not. Those things can include things like hidden friction. They can include things like emotional impact. So if you've attended our previous sessions on trauma-informed design, you'll absolutely learn more on the emotional impact your design can have. We can find assumptions in language, whether that's kind of gendered language and being careful in the way we throw things, or assumptions, things like click here, assume that the individual is sighted and knows where to click. And there's also things like unintended harm. And to give you a couple of examples, a color palette might feel calming to designers who design some of these soft pastel colors, but they may fail contrast checks. Or you may have a progress indicator, that talks you through how much progress you've made. That can support people to show how far I've got through. But if you've actually you feel like you've done quite a lot and you're still near the beginning, could increase things like anxiety, especially if you're under time pressure. For those who use LinkedIn a lot and other social platforms, carousels might technically meet kind of the requirements to pause, but can still cause overwhelm, especially if you've never used the carousel or have any other challenges. So these are things that aren't necessarily compliance failures, but they are experience failures. So people, those of you joining who are user experience designers or UI designers, this may be familiar to you, or you may be learning something new. For charities supporting vulnerable groups, public sector services dealing with people in a crisis, especially kind of mental health crisis or kind of suicide helplines, that distinction can matter enormously. If I need to fill in a form to actually get help and that form is overwhelming, that could be the difference between somebody being here and the difference between somebody not being here. So with that in mind, let's get practical and talk about how we can actually address some of those challenges. And with that, let's take a moment to look at what meaningful involvement looks like. So meaningful involvement isn't just, hey, can you check this for us? Whether you've designed a piece of e-learning and sent it out to your employee resource groups, your ERGs, before you make it live, whether that's getting people to test your shopping experience or your booking experience, and it's also not a one-off usability session at the end. If you look at different models like the AD model, which is commonly used in learning and development, it's a partnership from the very beginning. And when I consult with some of the large banking firms such as ING, we look at every step of that design process, right from the design and discovery pieces through to development, through to actual rollout. And at each stage of that process, where you go from the initial design to development and development to deployment, your costs of actually fixing these issues are potentially exponential. They go up roughly by 5 times per stage. So if you actually consult people or people with disabilities from the beginning, designers, leadership, people with lived experience, get them all in the same room, give them all equal rate, then you're going to have a much stronger ground to be building this successfully. Some of you may have seen things like Barbie with autism recently in the news. A great example of something that was designed with people with autism. They were consulted in the design process. What does having autism mean to you? What kind of assistive technologies do you use, such as the noise cancelling headphones? They were involved in the design, and that made a huge difference. On the flip side, where you don't have that kind of lived experience or don't have that representation in the room, we end up with situations such as hand dryers, where if a person with white skin puts their hand under it, or soap dispensers, it releases the soap. And if you put your hand under with darker skin, it doesn't release the soap because it wasn't tested on dark skin, which doesn't reflect the UV light in the same way, and therefore, is discriminatory not by design, but because it wasn't tested, because we didn't have people of different skin colors or different abilities to test this in the various stages of the design process. So meaningful involvement then looks at things like paid advisory panels. If you are inviting people to join a panel discussion or somebody with lived experiences to speak at your organization, make sure you're offering compensation if the organization can do so. If not, what other benefits can you offer? Can you offer to use your social platforms to elevate their message? Can you make your services free or give them a reduced rate in exchange? What does that value exchange look like? Can you do things like early co-design sessions to get to everything from initial surveys to allow people to speak, or kind of those testing groups before you've made any designs, to hear what's important to me or to somebody with a disability as a user. Structure your feedback loops then at any stage of the process. So before you sign off on design, are we all happy to proceed with this? Not just does it hit the objective? Yes, that's a check, but flipping that on its head and going, hey, we might not be able to use this. And if you go on Google and search the government accessibility personas, you can actually test your content with a series of personas before you go to certain groups. Make sure you feel it's inclusive to them to show you have put some thought into it. But don't stop simply using personas. Always test with real people if you have the ability to do so. So that kind of governance that requires lived insight before sign off, that's going to save you potentially thousands if you were to get in a lawsuit later where you didn't ask anyone and it's discriminatory. I appreciate I've been speaking at pace, so I'm going to do a quick check-in here with everyone. How are you currently involving disabled voices? You know, there is a big mantra in the community to say nothing for us without us. We need to be including people with disabilities and a variety of different disabilities, from kind of cognitive conditions or neurodivergence, vision, hearing, speech impediments, which is one of those which is commonly overlooked, maybe mobility or dexterity challenges. How are you currently involving those voices? Please pop them in the chat or make a note on pen and paper if you have any thoughts which you could take to your manager or take to your leadership to do a bit better. That doesn't have to be streams, it doesn't have to be sentences in the chat. You know, it can be a one word or a phrase, and as I see them coming in, I'll comment on a few, but we'll spend a little bit of time on that before moving on. Ultimately, what I want to say is this is where depth starts to emerge when you have all these considerations in place, but there are risks too. So we'll talk about that in a moment, what those common mistakes look like. Just going to take a moment to take a quick drink and then we'll move on. Moving ahead then, I did say a moment ago what meaningful involvement could look like. But there are some challenges in that. There are real risks when organizations attempt to do this without any kind of structure. So examples include extracting stories without compensation, asking people to speak on panel discussions or volunteer tough experiences. It may be they were severely bullied as a child because of a speech impediment, or like I did as a teenager, feeling very othered by people who make well-intended comments like, "Oh, it must be so interesting to think like you do," which made me feel like, here's me in the box of how I think, this little box over here, and here's everyone else who thinks normally. It could be speaking about my experiences, my lived experiences with Tourette's, for example. Them kicking in when I, as a teenager, when there's already a lot of other body and hormone changes, kind of thing. Vocal and motor tics aren't exactly what you want to be going through as a teenager, and getting people to speak around that, to speak to their lived experiences, can be traumatic. Just as if you were to invite an engineer to speak on engineering or an AI expert to speak about AI, you're doing that because you believe in their experiences. You know they're good. If you simply know somebody with disabilities, that's not the same as having a disability yourself. So if you're asking people to share their stories, try and compensate if you can. Inviting trauma without psychological safety, so putting people under pressure, not giving them the right to say, actually, I prefer not to speak about this, or not sharing questions with them in advance can be massively helpful. Becoming defensive when giving feedback or challenges. I actually, in a previous role, almost got a disciplinary because the CEO invited feedback, and I was a manager at the time. Give me honest feedback from the team, and With my autism, I took that at face value. I give the honest, unvarnished feedback of my team, and the CEO wasn't actually the one who was offended. It was people below the CEO who were kind of offended on his behalf, and so just be careful not to become defensive. If somebody is actually volunteering feedback, they're not doing that to be a nuisance. Always assume good intent. If people are giving you feedback, it's trying to give you the opportunity as an individual, as a company, to do better. To say, hey, I struggle to use your services. I struggle to reserve a table at your restaurant, or I struggle to log on to the LMS. Rather than saying, well, it's obvious you just needed to follow the instructions or give more instructions, isn't the answer. If you invite them to share, okay, how did that make you feel and how can we make that easier? Feed that back to the team, or better still, create that opportunity to chat. These are opportunities to make it better for everyone. If you make it better for everyone, you get more employees or employees that stick around longer, so you reduce staff turnover and you get more customers. You also get more customers if you have more employees with these live conditions, because, hey, you know what? They look like me. I can trust this organization considers us because they employ people who look like I do, who think like I do. Other risks may include assuming one individual represents all disabled people. So I mentioned my neurodivergence earlier. My neurodivergence isn't going to be the same, even if they have Tourette's, ADHD, autism, just like I do, but are gay or lesbian, or I don't identify as a straight male, or maybe they have a different color skin or different religion. Like maybe they are a non-native English speaker, so if they struggle to understand the English UK and it's not their first language, getting frustrated that they're struggling to think of the word or trying to sign it or can't articulate it as well as you can. All of these things are going to be put in barriers. And if you shoot people down when they're trying to give you feedback, there's a really good chance they're either not going to come back, they're going to leave your organization, or they're just going to sit there in silence in future. Okay? You've lost an opportunity then to get good feedback from people who were willing to give it to you. And that's a real risk for any organization. So for enterprise and government teams, this is where ethical frameworks really do matter. Payment matters, safeguarding matters, and clarity of scope matters. If you said to somebody, can you carry out this task, and they do that, then that's fine. But if they've carried out the task and your expectations were different, but there's things in that briefing that weren't actually communicated, that's a barrier. That's a problem. If you can say, can you take this equipment upstairs? Once it's upstairs, could you put it away? That's very different than, hey, could you take this upstairs for me? Like you may find you walk upstairs and it's on the landing. Is ticked your brief, yes, and you're getting frustrated because they've not done what you thought they would do. But the clarity isn't with the individual, it's with the lack of instruction or the lack of clarity that was given. Doing this well builds trust, and doing it badly damages it. So how can we move forward responsibly? Thank you, anyone who is joining thus far and needs to drop off. This is a recorded session. I hope you can catch up if indeed you need to. Here's a simple model or simple framework to think about. It's not a beautiful acronym, so forgive me, it's not one of those CARE, ADDI, MASTER type acronyms, but it should be nice and simple and easy to think of. Number one, we listen. Number two, we validate. Number three, we adapt. And number four, we sustain. And that's not a four-step process, that's a continual cycle that goes around. So listening, can we create structured, safe ways to hear real experience? My recommendation is if you can create systems which allow people to volunteer that information anonymously, they're probably going to be much more forthcoming than having to give their name and or email address, before they give the feedback. And that may be through fear of discrimination. I know people who work in HR who were severely dyslexic, but they hadn't, even though they work in HR, hadn't disclosed that information to the company because of fear of being discriminated against. Hey, if I'm working in HR, I might be expected to work on policy and lengthy documents. There are tools like Read Aloud. There are a number of tools where we can make that easier for the individual? So can we create structured, safe ways to hear lived experience and put those things in place to fix it? If we can, then we can validate. Believe what you hear and don't explain it away. You know, if you have some assessment and people, maybe it's a 10-minute assessment or something, and the guidelines say, hey, if you're neurodivergent or if you have any other special educational needs, you can ask for extra time. If that extra time is 20 minutes, what really is the difference between 12 minutes and 10 minutes? Why then do we actually need the time limit in the first place if it's not a time-bound exercise? You know, unless you're testing somebody for surgery or like a bond technician where time matters, just believe what you hear. Do you know, if they're saying, hey, I need a little extra time to get this over the line, they're not doing it for a special benefit. You know, so don't try and explain it away. Number 3, adapt, make visible changes. When I work with organizations, sometimes I am really impressed at what they've actually done. But they say, you know, that actually not many people are using these features. And a large events company I worked with is a case in point. When I asked them, you know, have you actually communicated what you're doing to people? Have you let them know what you're doing? You know, put that on your website. Their face dropped, and the kind of they had the realization, we've made all these changes. We've got wheelchair accessible spaces. We've got headphones on chairs further back, so to help you hear the speaker at the front. If you know, in this large auditory system, there's all of these things that we have put in place. We have a quiet room, but nowhere on the website did we let people know, you know, what they can feature. There is no kind of accessibility menu that go, here are the things that we are proud as an organization to be able to offer you. You know, you need captions on this webinar, you can turn them on by default. You know, all of these things, you know, make a big difference. And it's not just people who have hearing needs that turn on captions. A number of people do. It might be a parent who's just got their sick child to sleep. Maybe a student on the train who's the only spot they could reserve is in the quiet carriage, but they really need to do that training or to catch up with the module. So accurate captions matter. You know, make those changes visible. Say, hey, this is what you're doing. Have that accessibility statement on your website and keep it live. Number 4 is embed it into governments, so it's not personality dependent. Ultimately, you know, this is where accessibility organizations still stall. It's that kind of the gap between making those adaptations, those workplace accommodations, and sustaining that effort, you know, to keep it up. So it's all good having an accessible bathroom, but if that's been trashed or if that toilet is flooded and locked, how quickly is that fixed? If you're in a room and there's a light bulb flickering, somebody might have photosensitive epilepsy. You know, how soon is it before that bulb can be fixed? You know, all of these things make a difference. So, and if you want to explore how this worked in your organization this year, do let us know. You can type me in the chat and we'll follow up. Or you can message me after this and we can absolutely have a chat. Keeping this moving though and moving towards reflection. Just a bit of reflection here, and with this I am going to go to control and allow people to unmute if they wish to do so. If you do wish to unmute, please use the raise your hand feature. I'll invite you to unmute your microphone. I would encourage you to turn on your camera so that people can lip read if they want to. They might not need it here live on the session, but they might be watching on YouTube later. Say your name, so if people can't hear you or see you, by speaking your name, we know who's speaking, and then mute after you've asked your question. I will repeat it just to make sure everyone's understood. But ultimately, where might your organisation be relying too heavily on the checklist? Please either use the chat or come off mute if you wish to do so. I'm just looking at the comments here. I can see Hannah has said the time management scenario resonates with me. It continues to be a challenge when assigned tasks, as I'm slow to process information and think of a solution. And I feel that I'm under constant time pressure as the business analysts and supervisors can be quite demanding. Hannah, thank you for volunteering that information. Hope you didn't mind me reading that aloud. That very much echoes experiences that I've experienced. When I was in the workplace, I never thought I was going to be made a manager. Through a number of reasons, with my autism, for example, I can struggle. I can be fantastic on the logic side, but I can struggle to understand emotion or kind of subtext or context. Things like tasks, if I'm working on a task and suddenly the priorities changed, as they so often do, suddenly a client says to you, hey, we need this by tomorrow. And your manager says, oh, drop what you're doing. I need you to finish this. Now, if you're someone with me who has periods of hyper focus and you are very close to the end, even though you need to change task and do something else that's deemed even more important, that's not, that can be massively overwhelming, and there have been scenarios where I've needed to finish the task I'm on before I can move on to the next thing, even though that challenge has changed. Another example would be people with me being very good at logic, understanding things like net promoter score where other people may not. I've had people message me on Slack or on Teams or simply call me out of the blue when I wasn't expected. Hey Mike, can you help me for a moment? And being well intended, I might give them 20 minutes of my time, and I'm then behind on my tasks because I've given my time away. I haven't necessarily let my manager know. And simple things like if people need my time going through my manager then saying, hey Mike, can we when you finish your task, can you give me a call? Giving me the ownership then to get in touch when I am finished, speaking through the parties and flagging things that way, going through a impartial other person can help with time management. So hopefully, Hannah, that gives you a few tips and pointers, but thank you for sharing. That's resonated with you. I can see you unmuted, so I'll allow you to speak.
Sure. Thanks for sharing, Mike. I'm glad I'm not alone here. My line manager is aware of my needs, and he's usually been very supportive, especially when I was dealing with challenging stakeholders. I think there were times where he'd spoken to my project manager and business analysts, and even former colleague has done the same, saying, look, this is how Hannah works. Please be patient.
And that's really, really helpful. And I'm sure having that, certainly from my experiences, I've been very blessed with managers and colleagues who've been very understanding and sympathetic of my condition. I know that's not necessarily true for everyone. So again, not to generalize, some people may have not had that support and therefore left their organization, and hopefully find their feet in a new organization. Before we move on from this, do we have any further reflections? Suzanne, I can see, for example, you've turned your camera on, but I don't want to make an assumption that that you're willing to speak. So there's no pressure. Just an invitation for everyone who I want people to be able to speak if they want to and feels confident to do that. I can see Sharon has popped in the chat too. I find checklists in health, education, and social care, so not societal care, are barriers to my work with clients. So they don't have the knowledge of working and supporting others. So again, things like checklists to say, hey, have you completed these criteria? Sometimes, just simply asking the question, how can we get what adjustments do you need? How can we get the best from you? These things can make a big difference. Sharon, I don't know if you want to come off mute and say a word. There's no expectations and no obligations. But hopefully, from those of you who are listening along, you'll notice that most of these answers are systemic. They are process, procurement, capacity, or culture. So, it could be the processes aren't in place to support us. If I have a challenge, who do I go to? Do I go to my line manager? Do I go to HR? It could be procurement. If we're buying things in, are we asking the right questions? Capacity. If we are overwhelmed and or if I'm sick or I'm having bad mental health and I need to reduce my hours, I agree that with HR. But then the sales team and other people who don't know and haven't been informed of my reduced hours or something, are they still putting the same level of pressure on me? Are they still assuming I'm working a 40-hour week, or do they know I'm on reduced hours? All of these things matter, and culture matters too. There is the saying, culture is the worst behavior you kind of walk by or ignore. If you have a senior member, or it could be any colleague, making sexist comment or flipping comments. The amount of times I've heard, "Oh, I'm going to have Tourette's in a minute," in a moment of anger, meaning, "Hey, I'm going to swear or say something funny." When I'm in the room, I've overheard it, or sly comments like, "Oh, everyone's a little bit autistic," or "Everyone's got some ADHD." Things that kind of erode or remove our identity. These things can make a big difference, and that's why this is strategic work, not just design work. If we get this right, we reduce staff turn. We keep our colleagues. We create a system of psychological safety, and we innovate more. We keep people, and keeping people with disabilities on our team, that attracts customers who go, "I see myself in this," because there's been thought in the design, thought in how you deliver the service, and it really can open up a number of doors. So with this, I'd like to kind of open up questions. I know we touched upon this just now, but we are able to take some live questions, and to help kind of to prompt this next section. One of the things I'd kind of love to throw out here is, what kind of things would make this hard in your organisation? Where might that resistance come from? Is it from leadership? Is it from colleagues who go, "Oh, why should that person get special treatment? I'm doing the same hours. Why should they get the benefits?" These are all real examples I've heard, all things we've heard through our barriers and accessibility surveys. So not making this stuff here. And ultimately, what would leadership need to see to be able to prioritize these things? I'm seeing a comment here. I cringe every time I hear the words, "You don't meet the criteria," and this is something I hear quite often, and even in a societal context where quite often aspects or individuals can fall through the gaps. There's access to work, certainly here in the UK. All these systems are in here to try and help us. But what happens when in scenarios where you're kind of not quite blind enough or deaf enough to get the support that's out there, but too blind or too deaf or too dyslexic, so to get the job, done as anyone else would. So you need adjustments, but because your position isn't considered severe, those accommodations aren't had. They aren't met. Are these things that sound familiar to you, alien to you? Again, love to open up to the floor. If anyone does want to speak, feel free to use that please hand feature. No obligations, no expectations. Suzanne, if I see your hand up, I'd love to kind of invite you to share your thoughts.
Yeah, just happy to contribute, I suppose, to the conversation. So I work for Guide Dogs for the Blind UK, and I feel our organisation, we do a lot, obviously, for that group of people who live with sight loss, and I feel like we have our lived experience campaign officers, and we do a lot for that group of people. So my role is creating, I don't do the digital side, but working with subject matter experts to create learning content for our technical roles. So they are the people that work with the dogs. And I think I feel like we are continually working towards improvement, but there are still those areas where, for example, if I think of, we have many staff who work with what you would think of as kennel staff, for example, and there is always that assumption that it should be somebody that is working with those dogs would need to be sighted and would need certain things, but actually we have seen breakthroughs in areas where, for example, we have a visual rehabilitation specialist, which is somebody working with those with sight loss on environments and their home environment, etc. And we do actually have people in those roles with sight loss, which there's historically there would have been an assumption, oh, well, they can't work with the dogs and they can't do those roles. But actually, we're starting to break barriers. There's still work to do. But we still need to, I think, look at other accessibility, not just sight loss. And so I try to come to these things to also learn not just about that one disability. So there's still a lot to learn. But yeah, so I thought I'd just come off of mute just to add to the conversation, really.
Really appreciate you doing that. And so on the sight loss and guide dogs thing, I saw an example just yesterday that made me stop and think, you know, because it was something that I'd overlooked in design, and that was there are a number of organisations which, or venues, if you're booking an event, which may say, yeah, we are guide dog friendly, you know, so guide dogs welcome and stuff like that. But then you discover, you know, that oh, the room that's been booked is on the top floor, or do you know the keys to the quick escape or something, do you know, are with the receptionist, and you need to ask an individual to be able to be let out. Now, one of the things that can be commonly overlooked is, where does my dog wee? Do you know, like, if you are in a room where, you know, like, these dogs can't communicate like a human would say, oh, excuse me, where's the toilet? Do you know, like, they ultimately, we need to be able to get the dog out quick, or have you know, some kind of litter trade. That kind of consideration needs to be there. So it's one thing to say, yes, guide dogs are welcome, but if we're not putting things in place, for example, making sure there's water so the dog can have a drink, you know, communicating with people who may have a fear of dogs, or a phobia of dogs, you know, that all of these things can make a big difference. And I think it's fantastic that you're obviously acutely aware of your target audience, your beneficiaries, but coming to events like this where you can get awareness. And that's where when organizations engage me for things like neurodiversity sessions, I am very deliberate in those, that before you go away and implement the things I've spoken around that are barriers in an organization, do consider who else you might be excluding. So, for example, I gave the example earlier, the benefits or the challenges of open plan offices, you know, or the benefits of working at home. Open plan offices can be a nightmare for those of us who are neurodivergent. They can be very loud, and it's not necessarily the volume of noise that can be a challenge. It can be the complexity of noise. You know, the printer going, the conversations across the room. It could be the kettles on. You know, just people on meetings. It can be the complexity of the noise that's overwhelming, and that might be not just an office environment. It could be family fun days if I'm a parent taking my child. You know, all of these things can make a difference. An individual listening on one of those sessions may go, okay, well, open plan offices are a challenge. Let's not have an open plan office. You know, I want to kind of disclaimer, like, that is not what I'm saying. Open plan offices, for example, can be a vital lifeline for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, where they rely on line of sight to be able to lip read. And one of the things we do in our hackathon type events where we're trying to design inclusion is to throw out some of those challenges, where we may have personas with conflicting needs. So if I have person A who gets who has low vision, so they need it turned up like bright and high contrast in order to be able to follow along. And then you've got person B who gets a migraine or migraines, you know, through bright lights, and therefore they need it toned down. You've got both attending your event. How do you include both of them? Ultimately, you know, the recommendation in that specific context would be, go with the bright option and provide darkening glasses, you know, so people can still look at the screen and follow along. You know, one of the things, certainly when we're working towards kind of the kind of adhering to the web content accessibility guidelines, when you start getting to level AAA, these are areas which are almost niche and specialist. You know, so in fixing it for one individual, you may inevitably be breaking it for someone else. So by giving people choice, by giving people options, this is how you really empower users, you know, to take things from to get to the most from the session, what they need. Now, I'm just looking at the chat once more. I can see a couple of people who've needed to leave, but enjoying the points around checklists that can be restrictive in some ways, and needing to think about the blogs. I see Ellie, who said You find challenges only tend to be prioritized by leadership in response to reputational damage, reactively rather than a consistent challenge, and support as the norm. Again, this is something I see quite often, or I see the polar opposite, where leadership are almost paralyzed into inaction because they are so afraid of getting it wrong. This what's flippantly been called kind of snowflake culture. I don't say anything in fear of getting it wrong, therefore I take no action at all. Instead, I try and encourage this progress over perfection mentality. Is a phrase I got from Susie Miller, who those of you who work in learning development and care about accessibility may have known. Another analogy I like to use there is this concept of Trojan mice. You don't need accessibility or inclusion to be this massive Trojan horse heading to your organization, making leadership panic. We can all be Trojan mice and infiltrate an organization by making small micro changes, by making sure my design has good fonts, a decent font size, good contrast, by making sure I have paid attention to my work, and then celebrating the successes of other people who've made the good adjustments. These are things where hopefully we can overcome those leadership barriers, to celebrate the wins and say, hey, we did this. This is the impact this is had. In terms of key reflections, then, and moving beyond the kind of the checkbox, so to speak, standards are there to protect you. Lived experience improves you, and ultimately, if you want to explore embedding lived experience properly into your accessibility strategy at your organization, again, please pop a me into the chat or get in touch with us after the session, and we can absolutely follow up. As we are approaching the end of the session, I do want to say thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the work you're already doing in your organization, and ultimately, real inclusion starts with listening. Thank you, Hannah, for commenting, and we will be in touch to continue our conversations. I'm very excited to be collaborating with you, hopefully very soon. And what other things? I'm just going to pop a couple of links in the chat now. In the chat, there is a link to download the deck. It was the same one as shared earlier. There is a link to connect with myself on LinkedIn if you want to continue conversations there. And there's also a link to the type form on the screen. Please do give your feedback. We do actively look at that. Your feedback isn't going to go into the ethos and never considered. We look at that feedback and make improvements every single session. So hopefully, by the time we come back to what month are we now? We're in February now. March's session, you're going to feel even more included than you were in previous sessions. It could be I spoke a little fast when I get excited, particularly with my Bristolian accent. For those of you dropping off, I want to say thank you for joining. Thank you very much for highlighting those of you who said it's an engaging session. Olivia, if you're around as our marketing consultant, I don't know if you want to say a few words whilst we're still on record. No obligations there. I know you're in a situation where you may or may not be able to do so. But thank you everyone for joining. I will keep the recording going till 1 o'clock if anybody does have final questions. If you do want to stick around and ask a question off recording, then I'll give you a few minutes after 1 o'clock to ask that in a more psychologically safe environment. Thank you everyone for your compliments on the session. If you've enjoyed this one, please do go back on Eventbrite and look at our future sessions. They are currently scheduled through to July, and I will be working with Olivia, our marketing consultant, to add more to that. So do watch this space. And ultimately, your advocacy can make a big difference. So if you've enjoyed the session, please do share the recording or our inclusive insights with your team. It could be your colleagues or even your socials. If you've enjoyed it, say, hey, I attended this amazing accessibility session today. Your advocacy really does make a big difference to a small business like ours. And but if this is a one-off engagement and you won't come back, thank you for making the time today. But I sincerely do hope to see many of you again in the near future. All the best, everyone, and I will stop that recording in just a moment.